Amazing. So, Steph, I will just quickly give you an introduction. For those who don't know, Steph is an archaeologist based in Canada, currently in southern British Columbia, and a PhD student who researches the use of archaeology and pseudoarchaeology by far-right North American conspiritual groups and individuals. Um, her main focus is currently on Brother 12 and the Aquarian Foundation, which is a really interesting conspiritual organization largely around the 1920s, and how their ideology, conspirituality, and their perception of the archaeological record overlap. You can read more about that in Steph's work, including on her blogs at Bones, Stones, and Books, and also in her academic writing, especially manufacturing history, which we love and which Steph's going to be relating bits of today. Steph will be looking at pseudoarchaeology, examining examples of its political corruption, and advocating for how it's a really timely and relevant like zone of research for interpreting and responding to far right heritage appropriation. So we now have more of our participants in, and we are getting up to 5 past. Um, I think we should start, and people can come in as they do. Um, so without further ado, Steph, I'd invite you to take it away. Thank you so much for being here.
So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, and thank you for joining this talk as well. Pseudoarch might seem exceptionally goofy, and I think because of that, its appearance in right-wing or far-right spaces has gone a little bit under the radar. And I still encounter archaeologists who think it's a waste of time to talk about it or to view it as something serious, let alone something that's dangerous. But it can be very dangerous, a very dangerous door opener in particular. Believing that aliens built the pyramids can lead to far more serious issues than just believing that aliens built the pyramids. And so that's why it is something important to talk about. And today, that's what I'm going to do from a North American perspective. There's so many examples and people and areas I could have included far beyond this presentation time span, but I had to narrow it down, so I'm sort of focusing on North American stuff. So my background is actually in bioarchaeology, but currently I'm a historical archaeologist on the south coast of BC, and I'm a PhD student through the University of Alberta. And my research examines the conspiritual landscapes of Brother 12 and his Aquarian Foundation, who moved to BC from England in 1927. They ended up building 3, maybe 4 communes out here. They took a lot of guidance from Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy, which is someone and something that you hear a lot about in pseudoarch and conspiracism more broadly. And the foundation believed that they were responsible for preparing humanity to transition into the age of Aquarius. But they were also influenced by Henry Ford and also likely Nesta Webster. So they believed that they had to expose the truth about a secret cabal of Jews and Catholics who were working towards total world domination. And all of this was to happen in BC, apparently. But Brother 12, for a short time in 1928, did get involved in American politics, and he formed an anti-Semitic and anti-Catholic third party that was centered in Texas, which he partnered with militant Freemasons and the KKK to spread the word about this cabal's takeover. He also had connections to William Dudley Pelley. I actually think it's Pelley had connections to Brother 12, but I'll talk a little bit about Pelley in a bit. And Brother 12 was also into pseudarch stuff, mostly Atlantis and pyramidism. So Brother 12 is the historic field-based side of my research, and the contemporary side looks at pseudoarch's appearance in far-right spaces. And I've published a few things related to that, and this presentation is mostly focused on a chapter I published a couple of years ago, or last year, I should say, which was really focused on 2 individuals I came across in the wake of the first season of Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. And I'll go through some other examples that will lead us up to those 2 individuals, and also share some of the social media reactions to my chapter, which were delightfully dramatic. But first, what is pseudoarchaeology? Pseudoarch ultimately refers to archaeological conspiracy theories. It's the use of archaeological knowledge to propose alternative and speculative claims about human history, in which the power is placed on narrative of what's called stigmatized knowledge. In pseudoarch, facts aren't nearly as important as narrative. There are many different varieties of pseudoarch, and at least for me, what sets them apart from just general misinterpretations is that conspiracist stigmatized knowledge aspect. It's one thing to get things wrong, but if your reaction to correction to that is to claim that government-controlled archaeologists are actually suppressing the truth, I mean, that's something a little bit more than just a misinterpretation. Michael Barkin's book, A Culture of Conspiracy, and his work more broadly is very useful for understanding conspiracism, and that's where the term stigmatized knowledge comes from. What are conspiracy theories? Well, they're modes of thinking that claim nothing happens by accident, nothing is as it seems, and everything is connected. Conspiracy theories can range from pretty simplistic up to extremely complex and multifaceted, but they all rely on these three principles. Stigmatized knowledge claims can be both found within conspiracy theories and they also function themselves as a basic form of conspiracy theory. Stigmatized knowledge claims are claims that are believed to be true, despite knowledge validating institutions like universities, scientific bodies, museums, and so on, not accepting these claims as true. So, in stigmatized knowledge claims, facts don't matter a whole lot, and stigmatization itself becomes a signifier of truth. Something must be true because it's being stigmatized. And because stigmatization is the proof, it becomes really easy for people to hold multiple and seemingly disconnected conspiracy beliefs at the same time. Stigmatized knowledge rhetoric acts kind of like a glue that binds all these ideas together. Here's an example of what I mean by that glue. This is from a recent article about the right-wing Reform UK Party and the ways the party presents itself to attract more support. The author interviewed a canning factory worker named Eddie about what drew him towards Reform UK. And he talked a little bit about conspiracy theories, and he specified the work of popular pseudoarchaeological author Graham Hancock. Now, the article gets Hancock's claims wrong. He's not really an ancient aliens guy. He's dabbled in it, but he's not really an ancient aliens guy. But the point still stands that the stigmatized knowledge rhetoric in Hancock's claim was part of the path that connected Eddie to reform. So Barkin identified 5 different types of stigmatized knowledge, and you'll find examples of all 5 within Pseudoarch, but the ones that I see most often are those of forgotten knowledge, rejected knowledge, and suppressed knowledge claims. Forgotten knowledge are claims that humans have forgotten a period of history due to whatever dramatic reason. Archaeology can be used to remind us of those times. Rejected knowledge are claims that archaeologists are just immediately rejecting anything that might contradict the established narrative because of some dogmatic adherence to that narrative. And suppressed claims are the classic archaeologists are just trying to hide the truth. Sometimes it's because we're allegedly paid to do it. Sometimes we're concerned about our reputation. There's many reasons we hide the truths. So here's a really clear example of pseudoarchaeological stigmatized knowledge rhetoric from 2 extremely annoying men, Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson. This was recorded last year. It's pretty recent. There should be volume, but there's also captions to read along. So,
I adamantly agree with your point that our understanding of history is not supported by the archaeological or geologic record. Okay, it's just fake. I'm not sure what the truth is, but clearly the story we were told is not true. So there's that.
By the way,
And
interrupt real quick.
my
Did you know
takeaway
the
from that-
WEF is running around the world suppressing hundreds of archaeological digs with the UN right now, where they're now saying the environmental thing to do is not dig up this. Why don't you just said it, but why don't they want this dug up? But I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I didn't know that, but that's absolutely perfect. There has been, it just tells you a lot. There's been an extraordinary effort on the part of various authorities over the last 100 or so years to suppress and distort archaeology.
Stigmatized knowledge gives a lot of power to pseudoarch through the allure of that chase for proof. Stigmatized knowledge rhetoric becomes the proof and it becomes more powerful as archaeologists criticize the pseudo-archaeological claims. Our criticism becomes more proof that the claim is true. And as I've already mentioned, stigmatized knowledge also makes pseudoarch more easily welcomed into other ideologies, worldviews, and conspiracy theories, including those that are hateful and harmful. Religious studies scholar David G. Robertson has talked about how lies about the present can convince people that there are also lies being told about the past. But the opposite is also true. Lies about the past can convince people lies about the present. And that's kind of how pseudoarch acts as a very powerful door opener. In some cases, pseudoarch can act as a door opener just for individuals. This is Ian Carroll on the Joe Rogan podcast. Rogan is really into pseudoarch stuff. And his podcast is recognized by experts as a stop on that alt-right to far-right highway. And Carroll is known for his anti-Semitism and palling around with Nazis. And this is Carroll talking about how pseudoarch drew him into additional conspiracy theories.
But yeah, I get down with the ancient ones, like the Hancocks of this world. I love that was my first conspiracy theory stuff back when I was a leftist. Is I was just like ancient conspiracy theories. Let's go, and it's so compelling. The Great Flood, the Randall Carlsons of this world, and the way that they kind of talk about. And it's so obvious more and more and more that there is a cover up. And Jimmy Corsetti has been really going hard at mainstream archaeology lately. Of
He's fantastic.
Right? To not just look at the evidence of the old school, like the ancient conspiracy theories, but actually to just go at the cover up today, because that sometimes is the most effective thing, is to just target the cover up, because that is clear evidence that we're onto something.
Yeah.
Very clear evidence, for sure. So in other cases, pseudo-art can be used as a door opener to draw other people into whatever ideology or conspiracy theories you're selling. In the conspiracism world, this is known as red pilling, which takes its name from the Matrix movies, in which the red pill offered to Neo will allow him to see the truth of the world. On the screen is a somewhat chaotic-looking map known as the Q-Web or the Q-Map, which was created by artist Dylan Lewis Monroe, and it quickly became one of the QAnon movement's most popular images. In numerous interviews, Monroe has discussed how, similar to Ian Carroll, he was drawn into conspiracism through pseudoarchaeological claims. Though in Monroe's case, it was mostly ancient alien stuff, especially that popularized by David Icke. Monroe created the Q-Web as a way to red pill the masses, he has said, by showing them how all sorts of historical and contemporary truths, hidden truths, are connected. And the map is organized into time periods beginning in deep history and moving through to today. And it literally begins with Atlantis, Lemuria, and Mu, which are very popular pseudoarchaeological topics. In several interviews, Monroe has talked about his own pseudoarchaeological beliefs and how he thinks that pseudoarch is an important part of red pilling people. In the quote on the screen, for example, there's a mention of how most people believe that archaeologists are hiding the truths about Atlantis and ancient civilizations like Atlantis. And for Monroe, that's a good way to hook people onto other conspiracy theories and draw them further and further down the rabbit hole, he says. And to be honest, he's not actually that far off on the claim that most people believe in things like Atlantis. On the screen is a graph that I threw together with data from the Chapman Survey of American Fears, which has been run almost annually since 2015. And this is from actually a subsection of the much larger survey. 2021 was the last time the team asked these questions, but I've been told that they might be adding this section back onto their next survey. Anyway, the survey asked Americans if they believe that ancient advanced civilizations like Atlantis once existed, and they asked if Americans believed that aliens had visited the Earth in the ancient past. As of 2021, approximately 50% of Americans believe in Atlantis-type things, and the number of ancient aliens believers has steadily risen to 43%. That is a lot of people. Pseudo-arch is not as fringe as archaeologists would like for it to be. The inclusion of mythologized histories and historical revisionism is considered by experts to be one of the defining features of the far right. Jason Stanley, one of the core features of the far right, I should say. Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, talks about the weaponization of the mythical past in his first chapter, and I think it's a pretty good general overview. The far right is really good at weaponizing mythologized nostalgia. They're creating a yearning for a past that never was. And they use that to gain support for whatever cause they're going on about. In historical cases, like with Mussolini, a mythical past was meant to just be mythical, to create pride and support for this more glorious past that puts fascists on top of everything else. But more contemporarily, the far right has sought to bring their mythologized histories to life. And archaeology is seen as a way to do that because archaeology is viewed as a means for scientifically legitimizing history. Where there is no archaeology, pseudo-arch takes its place. And since it's still considered to be legitimate archaeology, but it's just got that added allure of stigmatization. The far right, in a variety of ways, adheres to ideas of civilizationism that groups together white, Western, and European nations into a unified community that's believed to be supremely advanced socially, technologically, and environmentally, while degrading everyone else as uncivilized. To achieve this, historical revisionism is used to create civilizationist histories within this view of superiority, and that's where pseudo-arch becomes especially attractive. It doesn't really matter if it's an extraterrestrial civilization or a terrestrial civilization. Pseudo-arch claims are almost all intensely focused on presenting archaeological proof of ancient technologically advanced civilizations that are often left pretty open-ended, so anyone can claim these fancy civilizations to be their own ancestors. For the far right who's looking for a past that scientifically proves their own cultural and racial superiority, pseudo-arch claims fit that bill pretty well. You can definitely find ancient alien stuff in far-right spaces, probably more often than people realize. But most often I see Atlantis type things that contain a lot of forgotten knowledge claims, because that's easy to tie to mythologized nostalgia. You're being reminded of a glorious past you forgot about because of either an environmental cataclysm that wiped out all your ancestors and now those memories have been lost to time, or because your community has been suppressed for so long by whoever you perceive to be the villainous others. And again, you've lost these memories over time. Once you remember, you can begin to work towards reclaiming that lost power. And pseudo-art can be used to both reinforce those feelings of power and superiority, as well as to draw more people towards those worldviews. And I saw some pretty clear examples of that from the two individuals in my chapter, but they're definitely not the only ones on the far right who've used pseudo-arc. Pseudo-arc has a pretty long history of appearances on the far right, especially claims regarding ancient Aryans, Atlantis, and Pyramidism. And I'll share just a few examples here, starting in the 1920s with the growth of the Christian identity movement as it branched out of British Israelism. Really important to British Israelism and the early versions of Christian identity is Pyramidism, and especially David Davidson's version of Pyramidism. Already prior to Davidson, the arguments existed that the pyramids had been built by the white descendants of Adam for some sort of divine purpose, and that's what the British Israelites really latched onto. In the 1920s, Davidson started arguing that the measurements of the pyramids actually correlated to specific biblical dates, further solidifying the belief that white spiritually pure people had built the pyramids because clearly the pyramids were too sophisticated for anyone else to have built. Around the 1930s, you see anti-Semitism being added to Pyramidism through people like William Dudley Pelley, and that caught the eye of the burgeoning Christian identity movement, who were looking for a historical anchor for their white superiority. Over time, Christian identity left behind the biblical date side of Pyramidism, but they still use the pyramids as proof of the accomplishments of their white ancestors. Speaking of Pelley, he was a screenwriter in the 1920s who in 1927 began to get into New Age occulty stuff. He got really into Davidson's Pyramidism and was also really into Atlantis stuff. And he was super anti-Semitic and argued that Pyramidism and Atlantis proof was being hidden by Jews. Pelley followed Adolf Hitler's rise to power closely as a fan of what Hitler was trying to do. And in 1933, literally the day after Hitler was elected chancellor, Pelley announced the formation of the Silver Legion of America, which was to basically be an American version of Hitler's movement. Pelley tied a lot of dates around Hitler and his own Silver Legion to Pyramidism. And he even tied Atlantis to Pyramidist ideas as well, arguing that that pyramid shape had been developed by superior Atlanteans. In 1942, Pelley was sentenced to 15 years in prison for sedition and seditious conspiracy. When he was released in 1950, he actually got really into ancient alien stuff, and he formed a UFO-themed New Age organization called Soulcraft. Pelley was still anti-Semitic, still super racist, only now it was with that ancient aliens flavor instead of Pyramidism and Atlantis. And Soulcraft lasted until Pelley's death in 1965. Carrying on with Nazis, let's jump up to the 70s. 1970, American neo-Nazi Frank Collin split from the National Socialist White People's Party, and he formed a new party, the National Socialist Party of America. In the photo on the screen, Collin is the one sitting down in the middle. In 1977, Collin led an infamous Nazi march through Skokie, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago with a large Jewish community. The results of the legal case that tried to prevent the NSPA from marching actually ultimately established rights for Nazis to march in the US. In 1979, Collin was kicked out of the NSPA when it was discovered that his father was Jewish and that Collin was a pedophile. In 1980, Collin was sentenced to 7 years in prison for that, and upon his release, he started going by the name Frank Joseph, and he became a popular and prolific pseudo-arc author, focusing primarily on Atlantis and the distant past of North America. For several years, he was the editor of the pseudo-archaeological Ancient American magazine. He has published a ton of pseudo-arc books and edited collections, which you can actually find at any mainstream bookstore. And he's not totally lost sight of his extremist views. He still writes articles for the anti-Semitic, historical revisionist magazine, The Barnes Review. Another important 70s figure to know about is James Madole. Madole actually got into American Nazism in the late 1940s. He founded the neo-Nazi National Renaissance Party in 1949. He was a big science fiction fan and also really into Blavatsky's theosophical teachings, which he combined into mystical ancient Aryans and Atlantis beliefs. He's considered to be one the most important figures in post-war esoteric neo-Nazism, and he published a newsletter called The New Atlantis, which was his Atlantis-inspired vision for a white North America. James Mason, and specifically his book Siege, is a huge influence on today's neo-Nazi movement. He joined the National Socialist White People's Party in the late 1960s. He probably overlapped there for a bit with Frank Joseph. After growing disillusioned with the mass movement style of neo-Nazism, Mason went off on his own, and he began to push for white supremacist terrorist acts. Also, like Joseph, Mason spent time in prison in the 1990s for child-related charges, and while he had been moving towards what he called spiritual mystical fascism in the 1980s, it wasn't until he was released from prison in the late 90s that he began actually publishing books and essays with this new spiritual focus. He drew in ideas from Christian identity, as well as esoteric fascist beliefs about Atlantis from Savitri Devi. And he also became really influenced by Eric von Daniken's ancient aliens theories, and he often recommended people read von Daniken's books. Mason tied all of these ideas together and argued that people had been genetically created by extraterrestrials, I think like 500,000 years ago or something he goes with, and white people were superior because they had the most extraterrestrial DNA in them. And now skipping ahead to the 2000s and the two figures I focused on in my chapter, Patrick Schoenard and Hardy Lloyd. As I mentioned earlier, I started writing about these two in the wake of the first season of Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix. Schoenard I already knew about, but Lloyd I learned about when I was looking into reactions on the first season of looking into reactions of the first season of Ancient Apocalypse on conspiracist and right-wing sites. And what I found interesting was how these two just reacted to Graham Hancock generally, who is not a white supremacist. But despite that, Schoenard and Lloyd found a lot of value in what Hancock was saying, which, at least to me, demonstrates that Pseudoarch doesn't need to be far-right nature for it to still serve really important purposes to the far right. And that's why it's still important to pay attention to Pseudoarch in mainstream spaces like Netflix, and how that content can be used to launder far-right ideologies into more palatable versions that makes them easier to spread. Schoenard is a self-identified white supremacist who has published several of his own Pseudoarch books, as well as chapters for several of Frank Joseph's books. He's written a ton of articles for a white supremacist website called the Renegade Tribune, before recently moving to his own alternative archaeology websites within the last couple of years. He's actually got a few different websites where he shares his work or links to where you can buy his books, which are also available in mainstream places like Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes & Noble. Depending on which website you look at, sometimes he still openly describes himself as a white supremacist, and on other sites, he describes himself as a dedicated political activist who advocates for transparency in historical knowledge and the democratization of archaeological knowledge. He's very into Atlantis and ancient Aryan Pseudoarch claims, and sometimes he delves into ancient alien stuff in a couple of different ways. Most of the time, he argues that ancient aliens guys have actually uncovered ancient Aryans evidence, and they just haven't realized it. But in a recent AI-generated audiobook he released last month, actually, he discusses the possibility that dragons and depictions of ancient serpents are actually related to ancient aliens. So I don't know where he stands anymore on the ancient alien stuff. Lloyd is also a self-identified white supremacist and neo-Nazi who adheres to a far-right ideology known as creativity, which is a white supremacist religious organization. He runs a website dedicated to this, as well as a BitChute video channel, where he shares all sorts of videos related to his historical ideas, which involves a lot of Holocaust denial and Pseudoarch claims about a superior ancient white Nordic civilization. He's also a staunch flat earther. You find a lot of flat earth stuff on his BitChute channel. And around all this, he spent a lot of time in and out of prison for various violent white supremacist related stuff, and he's actually currently in prison for having threatened witnesses and jurors in the trial for the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh that killed 11 people in 2018. Both Schoenard and Lloyd are big Graham Hancock fans, and they've talked about him across numerous articles and videos. And both have stated that they think Hancock is writing about an ancient white race just without realizing it, because he is clouded by multiculturalism. And by saying this, it also helps their own audiences accept Hancock's claims. Schoenard has used Hancock's work to reinforce feelings of white superiority by repeatedly, across numerous articles he wrote for the Renegade Tribune, highlighting Hancock's descriptions of a technologically advanced ancient civilization. The Schoenart has reinterpreted to mean ancient Aryans and the roots of an ancient pre-Aryan white civilization that came from Atlantis. He used Hancock's work to provide a temporal anchor to a perceived white superiority and has repeatedly reminded his audience that their racial superiority can be demonstrated across history. One way is through Hancock's work. Lloyd has used Hancock's work as a tool to draw more people into white supremacy. And while Schoenard was encouraging his audience to look past Hancock's lack of white supremacy, Lloyd told his own audience that it was actually beneficial to their cause. The quote on the screen is from a video I found where Lloyd was speaking to another well-known white supremacist who agrees with Lloyd about Hancock. In other quotes I didn't include here, Lloyd has favorably equated Hancock's work to Nazi archaeology, which helped establish for his audience that Hancock is worth listening to. And then Lloyd and his guests both talk about how Hancock lacks the stigma of being right-wing, which is useful because it means that more people are willing to listen to him without being turned off by right-wing views. Lloyd then encouraged his audience to use that to their advantage, pointing out that Hancock's book, Fingerprints of the Gods, includes subtle pro-white points that white supremacists can use to gently ease their friends and family toward their ideologies. So, as you can probably imagine, when the right-leaning Pseudoarch folks heard about my chapter, they weren't particularly happy about it. And I just want to quickly share some of the reactions to it, which were very dramatic. The whole thing started with Jimmy Corsetti, which isn't that surprising because he's a very popular outrage farmer, and I'll talk about outrage farming in a bit. He's a YouTuber. For the folks who don't know him, he's a YouTuber who has never met a conspiracy theory he didn't like, but he is especially focused on Pseudoarch claims regarding Atlantis, and more recently, he has also focused his attention on claiming that archaeologists are all super corrupt and engaged in a massive cover-up of whatever truth is hidden at Göbekli Tepe. He got mad at my book chapter a few weeks after its publication, and he told his at the time, almost 200,000 Twitter followers that I was corrupting science by associating Atlantis with far-right extremism and fascism. It was very obvious that nobody, including Corsetti, had actually read my chapter, which made the whole thing actually very funny. If they had read my chapter, they would see how white supremacists have used Atlantis to support their white supremacy. But that doesn't really matter because my stigmatization of Atlantis was the only thing that matters. It was proof of propaganda being spread about the ancient past to protect our dogmatic adherence to these pre-established archaeological narratives. It was part of a cover-up that people were now awakening to. As more and more comments began to roll in over the span of a few days, I started to group them into themes. Just observationally, I haven't yet downloaded all the comments to plot them into a graph, but I actually think that would be really interesting to do. Unsurprisingly, anti-Semitism was at the top of the common themes. I'm not Jewish. That doesn't matter because anti-Semitism is a part of almost every major conspiracy theory today, and Corsetti himself has definitely dabbled in it, so it's already in his fan base. Anti-Semitic comments included saying overtly that I was Jewish, subtly implying I was Jewish, or saying that I was working for the Jewish leader, orchestrating the great historical cover-ups. The next popular theme that emerged was just general misogyny. Again, not particularly surprising. For guys who claim identity politics is the worst thing on the planet, they sure do like to talk about identity a lot. Anyway, these types of comments simply pointed out that I was a woman and then tried to insult me by saying I was ignorant or obviously far left or whatever else they thought was insulting. Woke came up a few times. Another theme I identified was the nonsensical and what I called the head scratchers for their seemingly completely random comments. Random in the sense they have nothing to do with the content of my chapter, but in the overall world of conspiracism, sadly, these comments make sense to me. I see comments like these all over the place. But my chapter does not say anything about higher consciousnesses or babies or children or communism. I mean, it would have helped if these folks had read my chapter, but that's a little bit much to ask for. And the final theme, which was my personal favorite, was the generally overdramatic comments, which I suppose could be lumped into the previous nonsensical, but they were just too good. I wanted to highlight them on their own. The guy on the right is saying that my chapter is revolutionary. If anything, that is a compliment. And every once in a while, Corsetti and his fans bring me up again, so I don't think I'm going to be forgotten anytime soon. Now, the reason I'm sharing only some of the almost 500 comments I saw over the span of Corsetti's antagonism is because I think they illustrate nicely that really fragile fantasy of superiority and supremacy. Because look at how quickly these folks crumbled in response to this chapter. Not a single comment engaged with any of the actual content of the chapter. Nobody quoted anything from it. Nobody provided any contradictory evidence to what I was saying. Every single comment was like the ones I showed you, and not a single comment brought up any sort of fact. And that's partially because they literally couldn't argue with my chapter. They didn't read it, but also they can't contradict it. So instead they went for a distraction from their fragile position with comments on my identity, broader conspiratorial beliefs, very emotional feelings-based reactions to challenges to their narratives. So pseudoarch is a challenge for archaeology because, like much conspiracism, it really does not respond well to criticism or challenge. And when the far right is involved, engagement of any kind can be dangerous. But pseudoarch does need engagement, and when the far right latches onto a work, regardless of how pseudoarchaeological they may or may not turn it, it should not be left unchallenged. We just need to find safe and more responsible ways to do that as individuals and as collectives. Collective responses are always stronger, so forming collectives in our responses is something we really should keep in mind. And for the remainder of this presentation, I'm just going to quickly run through some resources and information that I find incredibly useful for approaching this, both in person and on social media. So the first step in pseudoarchaeological engagement is to recognize when it's actually better not to engage, both to avoid making the situation worse and to protect ourselves from harassment and abuse. And I really like Pilati et al.'s paper about the distinctions between traditional pseudoscientific conspiracism and what they call anti-scientific conspiracies without theory. So social media, which is a medium many archaeologists have used for public engagement, is a hotbed for anti-Semitic conspiracies without theory, which refers to less of an interest in evidence and far more engagement in intentional antagonism, rage farming, and trolling. You might have a chance if you're engaging with traditional pseudoscientific conspiracism, but when it comes to conspiracy without theory, it becomes much more difficult to be effective in any way. Critical ignorance is an important strategy to respond to what I just mentioned. Antagonism, rage farming, and trolling are all attention-seeking tactics, and it's really important to not reward antagonists with attention. Kozyreva and their team outline 3 types of critical ignorance, which refers to choosing what to ignore and where to invest one's attention and energy based on 3 different types of information. And they even have this lovely chart that sort of plots everything out. While attention should be invested in all 3 types of information, what types of attention and to what degree is variable. When it comes to antagonism, they recommend a do not feed the trolls approach. Do not feed the trolls does not mean to ignore, but rather refers to finding ways to address the information that does not feed the person behind it with amplifying oxygen, because in many cases, that antagonistic trolling is intentional. They're baiting people for a response. The oxygen of amplification is a resource I am constantly recommending. Whitney Phillips very neatly describes what antagonistic trolling is and how we might be baited into engaging with antagonists through what's called rage farming, which not only spreads their content for them, but rewards them with that attention. All publicity is good publicity to rage farmers. To be honest, to some degree, anytime we discuss pseudoarch content, we're giving pseudoarch content creators some amplification. But this 3-part document outlines several very practical suggestions on how we can minimize that amplification and use this to more responsibly discuss pseudoarch. Some strategies they suggest are not responding directly to the person making the claim. Respond to the claim itself by instead writing separate posts, whether a blog post or social media thread or whatever. Block the person's name because that refocuses your discussion onto the content rather than the person. It might also help reduce the possibility that that person will use you for engagement or target you for harassment. I shared Jimmy Corsetti's name in this presentation because he's the person who dog whistled me and targeted me for harassment, which I think is an important part of the conversation. But most of the time I don't share people's names in my online discussions because I just intentionally want the focus on the content. Use the content as an example, not the person. A popular response from archaeologists has been debunking or after-the-fact corrections of incorrect information. There's 3 significant issues with debunking that make it a slightly less effective method for addressing conspiracism. The first issue is that false information spreads very, very fast. Once it's out, it's very difficult to get control over it. The second is something called the continued influence effect, which means that even if information has been debunked or fully retracted, people might still rely on that false information. The retracted Ganang Padang paper is a really good example of that. And the third is something called the backfire effect, in which our efforts to debunk a claim can actually unintentionally strengthen belief in that claim and increase conversation about it. None of that means debunking is worthless. It just means that there's complex issues surrounding debunking that we do need to keep in mind. There's a lot of research that shows that pre-bunking is more effective than debunking. Pre-bunking is based on something called inoculation theory. It's been shown to reduce the likelihood that someone will fall for false information. The idea is that by giving people certain information ahead of time, it lessens the likelihood that they believe false content when they encounter it. It's kind of like explaining how a magic trick works. Once you know how it works, it's less likely to deceive you. And there's two different types of main types, I should say, of pre-bunking. If you anticipate certain false claims about a specific topic, you can warn people ahead of time that it might be coming specifically related to that topic. The second type, the one I use most often, is technique-based pre-bunking. And this is when you help people build resistance against pseudoarch claims by explaining how we evaluate something as pseudoarch or not, how pseudoarch claims work to deceive people. You're basically building a list of red flags for people to keep their eyes and ears open for, that people can take with them to whatever medium they might encounter pseudoarch claims on. We can tailor this specifically towards far-right claims, whereby we share information about how the far-right interprets information and how they might use that to sway an audience. Through pre-bunking, we're basically creating a toolkit that people can use to protect themselves from falling for false information. Pre-bunking is designed to prevent false information from sticking, but if it's too late to pre-bunk, then we should turn to debunking. I know I just shared a bunch of issues about debunking, but there are ways we can make it more effective if debunking is the best option we've got. An important first step is to understand why debunking doesn't work, what factors limits its success. For that, I highly recommend this paper by Stephen Lewandowski and his team. It's super informative. That explains really well not just the issues that limit the success of debunking, but also outlines really practical solutions that we can use to address those issues and make debunking more effective. Another phenomenal and practical resource I recommend is the free debunking handbook. They very neatly and accessibly outline the dangers of mis and disinformation. They recommend pre-bunking when possible, and they explain the issues that might limit the effectiveness of debunking. But what I like about this resource is that they took all of that information and put together a very practical debunking framework that's designed to improve the effectiveness of debunking across any medium. And it's actually a really simple framework. You start by stating a fact in a very concise, jargon-free way, which fills in the hole that you're about to poke in that false information. You never want to leave that hole unfilled. That's the issue, is if you're going to debunk, you have to add or refill what that hole you've created with better information. Then you say you're going to discuss false information. You follow that up by breaking down that false information in the different ways it misleads, much like technique-based pre-bunking. And then finally, you repeat the fact again, again, again. Repetition and patience are key. And to wrap things up, because otherwise I could ramble just for hours about this. But to wrap things up, I just want to reiterate that no matter how silly pseudoarch might seem, it is something that is taken seriously and used seriously by people who intend to cause a lot of harm against other people. As archaeologists, we have the skills and knowledge to be able to confront and challenge that, and it's important that we do, not just to support ourselves, but to support the communities around us so that everybody feels safe and welcome. As Bettina Arnold once wrote, though pseudoarch may always be around, we don't have to cede power to it. Our archaeological knowledge and expertise, when combined with specific communication methods, actually makes archaeologists really well suited for tackling this challenge and to help people not become entangled in or harmed by fantasized versions of the past. So thank you, everybody, for your time. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Steph. That was a really, really fascinating and informative presentation. And a genuinely remarkable level of detail, especially with regards to possible methods of responding to these issues. That I think lots of people who, sorry, can you hear me a bit better now? That lots of people who attend these seminars would have been really fascinated by. Certainly, I was. And yeah, you can see all the applause coming your way. Um, we will now open up to a little Q&A. Um, we probably have we have a fair bit of time because Steph is not only an incredible archaeologist but also very punctual. And what the way we usually do this is basically we ask for pre-asked questions. So we have one of those. So I'll start with that. And while Steph answers that question, if people have their own to ask, either feel free to put them in the chat and either myself or Dan can read them for you, or you can put your hand up in the chat or say, can you unmute me? And we will unmute you and you can ask the question yourself. Yeah, and we invite um, questions on a range of topics. Steph, do feel free to indicate, if there are any areas that you'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on, when you unmute. Um, and um, and yeah, I think that's it. So I might get us started with the question we had from the CryptoPad. Thank you to whoever asked it. Did you encounter European influences from anti-Semitic eugenistic ideology in far-right pseudoarchaeology in Canada?
From European influences in Canada, historically, yes, there's been a lot of European influence in Canadian far-right stuff. We also have Canada sort of gets this image as being this very like polite, country. We apologize all the time. We don't have the same kind of issues, far right wise as the States, but actually we have quite a long history of far right issues in Canada that actually a lot of people say what's happening in the States comes up here. There's many cases of what's happening up here traveling down south. Christian identity is one of them, for example. In the history of Christian identity, um, there's a big chapter of that here in Vancouver, actually, in the 1930s, was a hotbed for popularizing Christian identity. Um, Neo-Nazism has been a big, long-standing issue. It's a little bit quieter and more subtle, which is why it's really important to be able to recognize all these subtle talking points, all these subtle clues that, something here might seem really nice, but it's actually like a neo-Nazi talking point or whatnot. So there's there is some European influence, mostly more so historically, I think, than contemporarily, because now we have our own flavors of all that stuff that we tend to go with.
Thank you. Yeah, that is very insightful, and I think the description of those flavors is really oddly accurate. Um, does anybody have their hands up or any questions in the chat? Because if not, I'll be really selfish. I'll ask mine. Ah, brilliant. He's gotten ahead of me. You're allowed, Nick. Um,
Oh, I think he's muted still.
That's fine.
Oh,
Yeah,
here we go.
no, it's fine. Yeah, so thanks for the talk. That was really interesting. I'm sorry to hear you got victimized by Jimmy Corsetti. That must have been a rather unedifying experience. Um, I was just kind of curious because, obviously we talk about pre-bunking and sort of the ability to kind of almost like get information out. But at the moment, I mean, particularly in the UK, I can't speak for Canada, but we have kind of a big problem with regards to, sorry, that was Ray, one of my colleagues just out the window. But the like, we have kind of a big problem with like uh, kind of platforms to be able to get this stuff out on. So I mean, we don't really, um, like we don't really have like there's like one archaeological TV show now,
Yeah.
and that's kind of it. Like, Netflix is not funding archaeological TV shows. Like there's no particular kind of drives for that. And I'm curious where you see this arena for being able to do pre-bunking, just because in terms of what we have at the moment, it's quite limited. There's been some kind of strategies that, we've tried to employ over here for it because I mean, bluntly, like I know quite a few people who swallowed the Graham Hancock pill, so it's been quite. I get faced with this whether I like it or not. So, but I was curious if you had a sort of, thoughts on the kind of yeah, kind of how to get this stuff out, where to get it out, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, you're right. It is hard to get the same type of platforms, access to the same type of platforms that Sudar gets, like, Netflix, for example. It just makes me laugh thinking about that one episode in the first season when Hancock is there saying, "I'm being censored, I'm being suppressed." You're on freaking Netflix, dude. Like, you're not being censored or suppressed. You have this massive platform. Um, that we definitely don't get the same access. It's much harder for us to get the access to that. Another colleague and I have been trying to pitch an op-ed piece about that silly open AI pseudo or not pseudo well, ARC challenge that they just announced the winners of, which they also added this like pseudo ARC flavor to it in their own announcement of this challenge. So like, but nobody's biting on that, and yet you've got Hancock popping into all these like newspapers and these interviews, these big public speaking events. So it is really hard. There is no easy answer. And I think we just need to keep being pervasive and prolific with sharing content. Like there is already so much archaeological content out there. The issue isn't really that there's not enough. There's so much out there on YouTube, Time Team, social media. It's just the issue is really why are people not gravitating towards that and still going towards the pseudo-arc stuff? Part of it is that allure of stigmatization and the entertainment value as well. So I mean, social media is still a place to get this information out, especially because so many social media platforms are free. I mean, Twitter is just the worst now. I don't recommend. I used to recommend Twitter all the time, but it's just a nightmare, so I don't recommend it anymore. Um, Blue Sky is a sort of not quite a Twitter replacement, but Blue Sky is growing quickly. TikTok, people should be jumping on TikTok, although with all the American stuff happening with TikTok right now, that's going to very quickly turn into a nightmare. I see Annalise in here. She's our TikTok expert. She can add stuff, info to that. But so more people just keep like jumping on these really open, accessible platforms, YouTube, yeah, TikTok. I definitely would not say going into the right wing popular platforms is a good idea. Like, I really genuinely think it's a bad idea to create channels in these spaces to try to counter the information that's there. That's not what's going to happen. Um, there's so much information out there that illustrates why that's not going to happen. Um, so yeah, I think we still just keep pushing. Write books. People still really like books. But think about how we present the information in the books, like just be more jargon free, more accessible. Ken Fader is a great example of somebody whose writing is just so entertaining. When you read Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries, like it's just entertaining. It's so interesting. And then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, I've learned all this stuff. He's also just a very entertaining speaker as well. So yeah, just like keep putting out the YouTube videos, keep trying to push for things like op-eds, speak to journalists, approach journalists, or if you see journalists looking for people to talk to, just keep putting yourself out there. Um, that's kind of like the best that we can do. I wish I had a better answer, but it is hard, like you say, right?
Thank you, Steph, for that really insightful and honest answer. It's definitely something that like, yeah, we've with this project we've been thinking about a lot is what are the limits of these forms of response and these forms of action and but also what are what possibilities are there to explore. And that's what I really loved about your talk was how that had that methodological focus. Any questions or hands up going on? Okay, I might seize the opportunity to ask one of ours. You spoke. Actually, no, I'm gonna ask this other one. Because I think it's slightly less academic. And it's more just out of interest. With your familiarity with the kind of pseudo-archaeological canon, especially contemporarily, um, in your experience, to what degree do proponents of pseudo-archaeological conspiracy believe it, and to what degree are they taking advantage of it, self-consciously saying things that they know to be dishonest in order to cultivate a response from people?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I sort of thinking back to Pilati et al.'s paper about the differences between pseudoscientific and conspiracies without theory. And I think that's where you could sort of start when you learn the differences between the two, you can sort of start to see the grifters between the believers. Um, when I look at social media, for example, which is where the conspiracies without theory sort of tend to take hold, and you've got people like Corsetti and Dan Richards and all those folks. Um, I think to some degree, I mean, they believe a little bit of what they're selling. But the true believers that you're going to find in the comments and the people responding to them. It's not going to be Corsetti and Dan because I think they've now, because they operate in this outrage economy, that's where their attention comes from, their money comes from. So they're just out there to say whatever will get people riled up, which is why Corsetti in particular, like he jumps so quickly from topic to topic to topic and then loops back around and topic, same thing over and over. Conspiracism is always fast paced anyway. If you're going to respond to things, you have to respond quickly. It's going to constantly change every day, every hour. And Corsetti is a really good example of that. So um, the people that sort of bounce from topic to topic aren't really the true believers. David Hatcher Childress is another one. Like I think about his books that he's written on like a gazillion different subjects. Like he's not really picked a niche to really focus into. And I think a lot of that is just seizing opportunity because it's going to make him money. Hancock has at least, dedicated himself to this specific subject and published numerous books and Netflix and stuff. And so I think when you go into the traditional pseudoscientific spaces, which are like long form, like blog sites, the old chat rooms, for example, in this paper by Pilati et al., they go into like flat earther forums and sort of some of the long running ones. And they see people really engaged in discussing evidence, being willing to not really debate, because debate is also a terrible idea, but willing to like discuss different bits of information. And that's where you're going to find some true believers as well. So it depends on the arenas and the spaces you go into, where you'll find true believers versus grifters. I get asked this question about Brother 12 all the time. Did he also believe the stuff that he was selling to his group? He had between like 2,000 8,000 followers worldwide, not just in BC. And so I get asked all the time, did he believe this stuff? And I think he did, just based on the way he writes about the things and the way he dedicated himself to specific things. Like he definitely believed in it, but then some of the people he partnered with, I think they were more of the grifters as well, because they weren't necessarily interested in the information. They were just interested in mining it for money and attention. So yeah, I definitely just read the Pilati paper to see those differences, and that'll help kind of make it clear, a little bit more clear, how to tell grifters from true believers.
It's a great answer. Thank you so much. Maybe we'll find a way to drop that Polati paper in the chat, or just the name of it, because it
I
sounds
think it was open access. If I remember correctly, it was open access, which
amazing.
is, yeah.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Okay, I will go first come first served with some of the questions we've gotten in the chat. Um, Drew Burns asks, have you encountered waves or larger trends of pseudoarchaeology proliferation in social media? And if so, what are those trends?
Um, like, are you thinking sort of like subjects, like topics that they jump onto and waves of that, or like?
Would you like us to unmute you, Drew, and you can maybe answer that question yourself? Would that be all right?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you. And hello, Steph. Thank you. Great presentation. I was going to specifically ask if there's like temporal or event related
Mhm.
connections. Not to get too specific, but in North America, in my experience, early September created a massive influx of deep fakes of pseudoarchaeology.
Mhm.
Specifically around here, they're talking about Tartaria. And so I think you probably have a lot to comment on that angle, but yeah, just wondering what kind of, I guess, the link between current events and
Mhm.
the proliferation of those videos, sometimes being, rehashed with new video content.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really key point, is that a lot of this stuff is just rehash theories, just with new mediums or video content, especially with AI and the rise of like AI generated shit. I do not like AI at all, so I will stop myself there. Otherwise, I will just rant about AI. But yeah, it is. I don't really notice anything particularly temporal, but definitely like, yeah, waves. And so much of it is just the same stuff over and over and over again. It gets kind of boring. So Tartaria was actually kind of exciting, to be honest, because it's new, newish. Yeah, man, if people don't know about Tartaria, consider yourselves lucky. It's a wacky one. Um, but yeah, Tartaria, somebody must have said something about Tartary recently, because actually just before this presentation, I saw that apparently in Chicago, they're starting to wrap 1920s buildings into Tartaria now, and I'm not sure yet where that came from. I haven't gone looking. It was just a brief mention I saw. Um, but yeah, there will be sort of waves depending on what the popular content creators decide on. So again, turning back to Corsetti, just because he has a very large audience, he gets access to a lot of big platforms like Rogan, YouTube, big speaking events. Kind of whatever he decides is his target of the week will create a general interest in that, and it'll rise up. Göbekli Tepe being a big one right now, and then he disappears from Göbekli Tepe for a bit, goes back to his Atlantis shit, um, disappears from that for a bit, comes back to Göbekli Tepe. That in that Alex Jones clip, that when he's talking about the WEF, that he got that from Corsetti at the time. So the waves there definitely, I do notice trends popping up and very quickly popping down again, and then cycling back, really just depending on the content creator that's pushing it, their level of popularity, and their access to other people as well with big platforms. But yeah, not necessarily a temporal thing, more just like week to week, whatever they decide generates the most interest. Yeah, I see Annalise nodding. For people who don't know Annalise, she's got a fantastic TikTok channel where she talks about archaeology. She shares archaeology. She responds to a lot of these goofballs on TikTok when they bring up stuff like this. But Annalise is a great example of somebody who's got a big platform and harnesses that power for good. So Annalise knows a lot about these trends through TikTok. So please jump in.
I just jumping in. If assuming you all can hear me, there's a huge storm right now. So if there's any horrible disruptions in the background, it's just because it's raining buckets. Um, uh, Amazing. 100% fully agree with literally everything you've said in the entire presentation. And yeah, especially the bit about how to spot the true believers versus the grifters. And I can just say from my own experience, because I was quite literally in the room while these conversations were happening, which is that pretty much anybody you regularly see as a contributor or a talking head on Ancient Aliens specifically, 100% grifters, but there is a bit of overlap in the true believer category at this point in time, because one of the things that would happen is that ahead of the forthcoming season, the producers would sit down with the regular contributors and just chat about the topics that were going to be discussed in the various episodes, so they can sort of pick which ones they felt the most well suited to. And then in the instances where it was a new-ish topic for them, they would just go and very quickly write a book about whatever the topic was, so that then their chyron on the bottom of the screen would say their name, author of relevant book on the subject, because that is literally how that works. Whether or not they still do that these days, I don't know, but that's how things started back in the beginning of that show. So that's a good indicator for that sort of thing. And then these days, it is, as Steph said, incredibly fast moving. It's a week to week change in the trends, whatever topics are grabbing people's interest and eyeballs on the various social media channels. And on TikTok, especially, which is where I tend to be, it moves so fast. It is a daily and sometimes even hourly trend. So it is one of those things where you need to be aware of what's going on, what people are talking about, so that you can then react or add as needed, or in certain cases, be ready with that pre-bunking or almost immediately debunking whatever that thing is right away, in the hopes that you can still catch that wave and try to, if not outpace, because at the end of the day, pseudoarchaeology and conspiracy content is always going to outpace actual information. But if you can sort of ride the wave parallel with it so that people are going to see the pseudo-arc conspiracy content, but then if they know that you're a trusted source of information, they will come right over to you to see what you're saying about that thing to give them the real information. So that's one of the useful things that I found about something like TikTok, even with all of its faults.
Wow, thank you so much, Annalise. I mean, this is a seminar. Getting a mini presentation almost in an efficient answer to a question. That's fantastic. Um, and yeah, we'll be emailing you, Annalise.
Absolutely, yeah. Happy to help. I have free wisdom. Like unlike the pseudo-arc people, I'm not going to charge
Yeah.
for a PDF download or a book or a podcast. Like I will just give you the information for free, uh, because that's what I'm about.
Thank you very much. Yeah, grateful for that. And yeah, so we are probably near to wrapping up. I think we've got time for one more question from the chat. I will keep going in first come, first served. I think it's quite a nice question to finish on. So from Sinden Medley for debunking, do you find that and maybe Steph and Annalise, maybe you could both jump in on this. For debunking, do you find that ridicule, i.e., laughing and not engaging with them, but laughing at their claims, works in the short term? This is something that's easier to do on social media.
Um, Not really, to be honest. Um, you have to be careful in how you're going to mock and how you're going to laugh because it can be very powerful in certain spheres, like when you're dealing with like far right fascist type people, mocking them, showing how ridiculous they are can be really powerful, especially for like then drawing together collectives. The more people see you pushing back this way, the more people feel comfortable doing that. But shame is a very powerful emotion and it can backfire quite easily in conspiracist spaces. Um, Conspiracism is very emotional and feelings based. And if you make people feel ashamed of what they're believing, the reason they've gone to conspiracist spaces in many cases is because they were already sort of feeling ridiculed, feeling mocked, feeling shamed for these ideas that they had. They're going through probably something tough in their life, and pseudo or not, well, maybe pseudo conspiracism is just giving them better answers that makes them feel better. So that's very powerful draw. It draws them in. They find themselves with this community of people that support them. So if you're trying to make them feel shame for what they're believing, it's actually more likely to strengthen their beliefs in these conspiracist claims. Um, so it depends on the spaces that you're in, and who your sort of target is, whether or not mocking or shame will work. But when it comes to conspiracism, it doesn't work very well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. And it's one of those things where having a high level of internet literacy really, really is necessary for you as a person engaging with other people on the internet, because you need to be able to know right away, simply from what someone has written, if they are in fact asking a good faith question, a bad faith question, if they're just a troll, literally just there to pick a fight on the internet. And then you need to know how to respond to those situations. And that's one of the things that I deal with on a daily basis in the comments section on TikTok. When I post on Instagram, I don't even look at that. I don't even engage with the Instagram comments. But on TikTok, I will, depending on the situation, the topic, and the question, potentially respond with one answer. But oftentimes, when a video is made about a topic that tends to be more conspiracy leaning or more pseudo-arc leaning, you're going to get a lot of emotional responses, as Steph said. And in those instances, almost any response will immediately trigger a reaction from the commenter, and they will dig their heels in, quadruple down on whatever that thing is, because they will immediately interpret anything that could be perceived as pushback as shaming them for having whatever that belief is. And then it just doesn't work. But I've found that when it comes to these sorts of situations, when there's a topic that hits the internet. Like I think the last big one, a good example was when that study about the scan of the weird
The
spring
spar.
coil system under the pyramids hit the internet. And of course, everybody took it and ran. And what I found in that situation, what is usually my tactic, is to take whatever the story is and say, like, okay, this is what's happening. Anyway, this is what we're going to talk about over here. It's like, if you want to watch someone else's video about it and get into like, oh my God, is this real? Could it be? All the good open-ended ancient aliens questions. Obviously it's your time. It is your free time, your social media. You watch what you want. I'm going to be over here talking about this thing that I think is way more interesting, and I really do hope that you come over here, and you're welcome to. But at the same time, you know, people are adults, they do what they want, or they're children and they don't know what they're doing. Um, in which case, I still just try to direct eyeballs over to where I am and say, okay, you may have seen this. Here's what the deal is. And that's really all you can do, and just leave it and give it to the internet and hope that it goes where it wants to go. And more often than not, it will find the right audience. And I have people now coming over in my comment section and saying that they saw something about a topic and they wanted my opinion on it. They wanted my information on it because they knew that I would be a trusted source of information on whatever the topic is.
Exactly. And actually, there's so many things in here that you mentioned that I think are really important. First of all, comments. So many people say, don't read the comments, don't read the comments. I hate to say it, read the comments. When you see these pseudo videos on YouTube, on TikTok, the comments are where you're going to get the actual meat of the situation. That is where you're going to see how people are engaging with what's being said, how they're responding to it. Do they believe it? Do they not believe it? So then it doesn't really matter, if it's a Corsetti video. Corsetti doesn't really matter. Like, he's a grifter. He's trying to generate outrage. But how are people actually responding to that is much more interesting. I even have an example of that from my Brother 12 stuff. I have an original 1927 copy of one of Brother 12's books that has somebody's scribblings in all the margins, the person who owned this book. So I get to actually see how people were engaging with what Brother 12 was selling. Did they believe it? Did they not believe it? And then also, like, when you're talking about how you're like, okay, people are saying this is what we're going to talk about. That's a really good approach. And that's why, like, when Whitney Phillips talks about, block the person's name, the person really isn't important. They're not important. So if you want to respond to something that, Corsetti said, Dan Richards said, whoever, whatever, they, at the end of the day, like, they're not the important things. It's what they're saying is the important thing. That's what you should focus on. And so to approach it as like, okay, so Corsetti said this, but like, who cares? It doesn't matter that's Corsetti that said. I'm going to take his name out. This is the content of what's being said. This is what we're going to talk about, is this content, is definitely absolutely the right approach. And places like TikTok are like a really good way to do that, because like the way you can sort of stitch yourself onto someone else's video. So right off the bat, someone can see the original statement being made. There's like I can't remember, what's her name? Gruba Homestead or something. I don't know if you've come across her videos. She's super, I think she's got over 1 million followers or something on TikTok. Super, super popular. She's like a homesteader, prepper, wellness person, super into Tartaria stuff and Pseudoarch stuff. And she just came out with a recent video where she like starts off saying like, these are things I'm not going to teach my children. And she's like, Egypt, I'm not going to teach them that Egypt was in Africa and Egypt. Instead, we're going to talk about the Grand Canyon. And why parts of it are blocked off. And then right away, somebody stitched onto that part. So you can see the content or see the comment being made. And then you can see like a good response to it. Yeah, she totally bought the Egyptians and Grand Canyon thing. And she talks about that a little bit in her videos, but she's like really into Tartaria. And she has this just like huge platform, which is really annoying. Yeah, anyway.
Thank you both so much. God, there was so much there. In what both of you said, I really loved the the through line of just how much internet literacy and literacy with these conspiracy theories you need to understand them. And it's something that has come up a lot in this project with regards to its interaction with being within academia, but then kind of needing to explain to someone that like, oh no, this person is actually saying something really important because they're referring to like a SpongeBob meme and also like a neo-Nazi dog whistle at the same time, and that and and like yeah, it's interesting. Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Annalise, as well for jumping in. But thank you, Steph, for such a wonderful talk. We are going to wrap up there, I think. Um, yeah, really, really appreciate the talk today. It was absolutely fascinating, and really, really insightful, especially some of those methods. And yeah, guys, do feel free to um drop us an email or get in touch with us via Blue Sky at a-rfa. You can also find out more about Steph's work at Bones, Stones and Books, her blog, or on Blue Sky at, I think it's Cult Archaeo, like the first three syllables of archaeology, at Blue Sky or .bluesky.com or .bsky.com. I can never remember. Um, or at, I think ResearchGate has access to your academic publications.
It
Um,
does, yeah.
Sweet, amazing. Yeah, but thank you so much again, Steph, for coming. Um, if you're new to our project, to Archaeologists Resisting Fire Appropriation, thank you so much for coming along today. We are a still pretty early days project that looks at various different responses to these issues. At the moment, we're focusing on seminars with some really creative speakers and thinkers. So if you want to see our previously recorded seminars, you can go to archaeologistsrfa.wordpress.com, or look at us on Blue Sky, as I mentioned before, and you'll be able to find out a bit more about us. And we will hopefully be having another seminar soon. Not sure who with yet. But we'll find out
Annalise, you should
together.
talk to
Yeah,
Annalise.
I was gonna say, cough, cough, Annalise. Um, um, but yeah, thank you so much again, Steph, and yeah, hope you enjoyed
Yeah,
as
thank you
much as
very
we did.
much for having me. Thank you for letting me ramble. Annalise, this was fun too. We should do something like this again. And yeah, like I'm on Blue Sky, perpetually on Blue Sky. So if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to reach me there, DM or public comments. I check in on Twitter, but I don't engage with Twitter anymore. And or email or whatever. Like honestly, feel free to email or message any questions, comments, whatever. I'm friendly. I don't bite very often.
Brilliant, amazing. Well, thank you so much. I'm gonna